There's a node in Houdini called Eikonal. You can use it to expand out shapes, to make trippy looking patterns, and even for contour plotting like this, which you can run in real time. So what does this node really do? Well, the documentation's surprisingly helpful. Basically, it travels from the darker pixels towards the lighter pixels, and it tells you the time taken to travel that distance. Let's start with a quick example to show you what that means. I'm going to start by adding in a COP network, then I'm going to go inside the network, and in here I'm going to make some points that I can use to expand outwards. To do that, I'm going to use a SOP import. So I'll go inside here, and I'll make a grid, and on that grid, I'm going to scatter some points. Now I'm going to make sure the grid's the right size. It should be 2 by 2, and it should be rotated to the XY plane. So now it's aligned with the layer. Now going back to the COPNet, I need to untick use external SOP, and now I'm getting my grid of points. At the moment this is geometry, but I need to turn it into a layer. I can do that using a stamp points node. Then I connect that to the points input. Now these are really big points, but I can make them smaller, and rather than squares, I want them to be circles. Also, I want the background color to be fully black. Now I can use the Eikonal node and drop it into the initial distance. At the moment it doesn't work because it expects a mono input, and this is an RGBA input. So I'll set the signature to be mono. Now the Eikonal node is giving a result, but it's not visible at the moment. The reason there's nothing here is because if you remember the documentation, it expands from the darker areas. So I actually need to invert the image so the points are black instead of white. Now the Eikonal node gives me this cell pattern. If I change the speed, it's expanding outwards from each of the points, and it's filling in the white areas with darker content. Now at the moment it's very uniform. You can break up this uniform look by changing the speed that it can travel. For example, if I type in fractal noise, I can connect this noise into the speed and change the values. If you look closer, you can see it's starting to break up the cells a bit, the more I increase the amplitude of the noise. By animating the points, you can see it's spreading almost like ink. To make it look more interesting, I'm going to use a ramp RGB, and plug it into the position. Now it's got some colors, and I can change it to infrared to get this crazy neon look. Then the number of cycles controls how quickly it reaches the end of the ramp, and you can set the outside behavior to repeat to get this kind of crazy trippy pattern. Now at the moment it's looking very busy because there's so many points, but I can use something other than points to get a better result. I'll delete this and replace it with an SDF shape. For example, this circle. I'm going to make the radius very, very small. Now this visualization's a bit misleading because it's not really a circle, it's actually a gradient. If I use a layer properties node, then set the type info to none, you get this radial gradient. So now I can plug that gradient into the Eikonal node, and it gives me this result. Now this is not very interesting, but watch what happens if I add in a brightness node and increase the brightness. As I increase it, you start to see these very strange patterns emerging, and these patterns are coming from the fractal noise, which is changing the speed. Now at the moment it's animating from the corners inwards because of the invert node, but I'll delete that, and now you see there's a circle in the middle and it's going outwards. Now this is still looking very busy, and that's because the number of cycles is very high. If I drop it down, you get a much better pattern. To make it look more interesting, you can make the noise a little bit bigger, and you start to get these very crazy blobby shapes. And if you increase the roughness, you get more detail around the edges. There's a few regions where you get this banding effect, and this happens because the noise has negative values in that area. You can fix the negative values by going to post-processing and ticking fold. That flips it over so they become positive values again. And that means you get this consistent look throughout the entire image. Then you can animate the phase to get this traveling noise effect. Another example is this contour plotting effect, where it travels faster in the light areas and slower in the dark areas. You can do this in Houdini, you just need to change the ramp. Rather than making it rainbow, you can set it to be a grayscale ramp. Then you can use an edge detection node to find the areas where it changes the most rapidly. If you set the method to simple, it gives you these very clean edges, or at least it would if my noise was a bit less detailed. If I drop down the roughness, you should get some very clean edges like this. Now instead of using noise, you can use image. For example, this file input is the speed. This image is in RGBA, so I need to to use a RGBA to mono node to convert to grayscale. Now the Eikonal node should give you a result based on that image. Now it's not traveling across the entire image, and that's because it's not bright enough. If I make it brighter, now it's finally going across the entire thing. And I can invert this to get the original colors from the Reddit post. Now it's looking a bit blurry, and that's because I need more pixels. You can get more detail by going to the Copernicus settings and setting the default resolution to be something higher, like 2048. Now, a better image to use for this might be the mandrill, so I type in mandrill.pic, and you get this beautiful monkey. I get some nice patterns from his nose expanding outwards. I can increase the cycles to get a little bit more detail, and I might want to untick normalize just to get some harsher edges. So you can see it travels a lot faster in the light areas to the dark areas. And again, you can animate the phase to get a traveling effect. Now all of this stuff works in real time, so you can use it on your webcam. I can use the live video node to get a feed from my webcam. I'll set the source to be my webcam, then I'll set the resolution to something low like 640 by 360. Then I'll do connect to source and toggle live stream. And then you see some idiot on your screen. But this idiot is in RGB, so we need to convert him into mono. Then you can go back to the end of the chain. Now it's destroying my computer, and that's because it's still 2048 by 2048. To fix that, I can go to the outside and untick default resolution, and I can plug the live video into the size ref. Now it should process it in the right size. So now I can fuck around and do some stupid shit with my hands like this. Now something else you can try is turning off the lights. If you turn on the Eikonal node, you get this pattern that changes as you move the light around. Now again, the reason for this banding is because it depends on the bright node. So if this is really, really bright, it should fill in the rest of the image, and you end up with this crazy looking effect. And I can put my hand in it to slow down the light. It forms a boundary where it slows down and starts going around the edges. So yeah, you can download the files for everything in the description and have some fun playing around with this node.